Forward on. All right. Good week, everybody. Good vach. Happy Monday. I want to the Parsha of the week is Parshas Pinchas, which is interesting because really Pinchas is spoken about last week's Parsha. At the end of last week's Parsha, if you remember. Narrowly spoken about this week's Parsha, but there is a little bit mentioned, and it's quite fascinating and quite a lot to learn from. Anyway, so the Parsha picks up with just going inside. Parsha picks up with Pinchas. What happened? Bilam is on his way home. Bilam was unsuccessful. Balak was really upset. And Bilam said, I have a little trick for you. God hates immorality. So get the Midianite women to seduce the men. And God, so to speak, removes his divine protection from them. And that's a good time to attack. So that's what he does. He gets some Midianite ladies to come over. And one in particular is the princess of Midian, or a princess of Midian. Her name is Kuzbi. And she manages to seduce Zimri, which is really bad. Zimri is the tribal leader for Shimon, the tribe of Shimon. And what happens? He brings Kuzbi to the tent in front of Moshe. And you can imagine what he was going to do. And Moshe is stunned. He does not know what to do. And nobody knows what to do. Stands up Pinchas. Pinchas remembered the law from 40 years ago. When Moshe came down from the mountain, he taught this law. What happens in such a case? When someone is making a chilul Hashem, desecrating God's name in front of everybody, it's called koinim poigim boy. A person, if they have like a spirit, their soul yearns to protect God's name, they're allowed to take action and kill somebody, provided this is a crime that is warranted capital punishment. Now, what's interesting about the law, if Zimri were to kill Shimon, Zimri would not, if Zimri were to kill Pinchas, Zimri would not be held liable. It's a very bizarre law. It's another one of these, it's a chayk, it doesn't make sense. It's not logical, but nevertheless, that's the law. So that's what ends up happening. Anyway, Pinchas takes his spear and kills Zimri and Kuzbi in front of everybody. And very interesting that the tribe of Shimon then goes and attacks, goes to make an attack upon Pinchas and try to kill him. And he's frightened. And his soul, Rashi says, actually leaves his body. He's so frightened that his soul leaves his body. It's very controversial. It's a very interesting thing what Pinchas did. He was right, and God said he was right, and he's going to give him the Brisi Shalom, which we're going to talk about, the covenant of peace. But nevertheless, it's a very bizarre law. We don't really do it today, but it's called a kanoi. A kanoi means someone, a zealot. If you act zealous for God, God actually loves it. But you got to really know what you're doing. Anyway, so they come, and his soul leaves his body. And that fits very well with the opening lines of our Parsha. It says, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. Usually when we say someone and call him up to the Torah, we give him a name, we call him up, we'll say, Yaakov ben Avraham, or Shmuel ben Yitzchak. We never say Shmuel ben Yitzchak ben Chaim. We don't say after the grandfather's name. We just say your name and the father's name. So why? There's many different answers of why Pinchas was also called the son of Aaron, but I want to focus on one from the Zohar. So let's just go back. He kills Zimri. Thousands of the tribe of Shimon come and try to attack him. He gets frightened. And the Zohar says that Pinchas' soul leaves his body. And the Zohar says something very interesting. Just reading it, how to translate it. Basically, Nadav and Avihu, right, the sons of Aaron, were killed in the very beginning. They died. They weren't killed. They died in the very beginning of the Parsha of the leaving of Egypt. Right. We built the Mishkan a year later, and they brought up a foreign incense, and they died. Their soul, it says their souls actually left their body. The Zohar says their souls actually wandered for 40 years. They couldn't find a place to settle until Pinchas, Pinchas' soul left his body. And says the Zohar, Pinchas' soul left his body, and Nadav and Avihu's soul, together with Pinchas' soul, re-entered Pinchas' body. That's what it says. And that's why it says Ben Aaron a Cohen. It says that he's not only the son of Elazar, but also the son of. Ben means the son of. He's the son of Aaron. He's the son of Elazar, which is true, but he's also the son of Aaron, because this is the souls of Nadav and Avihu. So he goes and they return, and God ends up protecting him. Just reading along in the Parsha. Now, this actually affects his behavior, says the Zohar. Pinchas lives longer than any. I just heard that Pinchas lives longer than anybody in that generation. I don't know. I just heard that, but there's another person, Achia Hashaloni, who was the teacher of Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, and also the teacher of King David. Also lived during this period of time. So I'm not exactly sure if that's true, that he lived the longest, but he certainly lived the longest in his tribe. But what happens? God gives him something very special. God gives Pinchas something very special. He says, Nesati lechem brisi shalom. I'm going to give him my covenant of peace. Now, the word shalom here is usually spelled shin lamed vav mem, but it's misspelled. It's shin lamed yud mem. Why? It's like a defected vav, so to speak. So there's two different explanations, of many, but one I want to just focus on two. The yud represents God's being, God's essence, God the way he is above the world. So he's, so to speak, endowing Pinchas with a special godly trait. He ends up becoming, what is that? He ends up becoming a high priest. He ends up becoming a Kohen, who is the representative of God. But also the Zohar says that it's teaching you something else. It's pointing to something else. The Zohar says Pinchas, the Gemara says Pinchas hu Eliyahu. It says that Pinchas is Elijah the prophet. Now, there are 5 places in the Torah where Yaakov, our forefather Yaakov, is spelled with an extra vav. It's Yud Ayin Kaf Vav Ves, or Vet. Usually it's just Yud Ayin Kaf Ves, but there's an extra vav 5 times. And there are 5 times in the Torah where Eliyahu the prophet, is missing a vav. And he spells his name Aleph Lamed Yud and Hey, which is how I spell my name, Eliyahu. What happened was Yaakov said to Eliyahu Hanavi, he saw in the future that Eliyahu Hanavi was going to come. We see this very often in the Torah, that a prophet is able to look into the future. He's able to have an effect upon the future. Who is Eliyahu? Eliyahu is the Mavasar HaGeula. He's going to be the one that is going to announce that Mashiach is coming. Yaakov said to Eliyahu, in the spiritual world, I'm going to steal one of your vavs. I'm going to take one of your vavs, not steal. I'm going to take one of your vavs as a mashkin, as a guarantee, as collateral, and I'm going to return it to you when you finally announce that Mashiach is coming. So what did he do with that vav? He stuck it onto his own name. And in fact, when Elijah, towards the end of the book, when it talks about Elijah, towards the end of the prophets, when Eliyahu is speaking towards the end of his life, well, he never really died, right? We'll get to that in a second. But when he was here in this world, in a physical body, he's missing a vav. And it says, in fact, it says that Eliah is going to come and tell the world that Mashiach is coming. And the vav will be returned. And it says that Elijah is Eliyahu. Eliyahu is Pinchas. That Pinchas is it's not sure whether Pinchas became Eliyahu Hanavi or he is a reincarnation of Elijah the prophet. But what's the connection? The connection is very simple. why did Pinchas become famous? Because a person misused his organ. Yeah, we have certain organs for reproduction, which are very holy, and you're not supposed to misuse them. And he misused them. Elijah, who was Elijah? Elijah was a prophet who came right after the end of King Solomon, and there was an evil king that took over the Jewish people, Achav, and he managed to convince 10 tribes, 10 of the 12 tribes, to start serving idols. Yeah, this is the beginning of the 10 lost tribes, so to speak. Now, what happened to them? They basically started serving idols. And one of the things that Achav, the king, decreed was no more bris milah. You're not allowed to have a circumcision. Wasn't a very good king. And Elijah fought vocally. He lived amongst the 10 tribes, not the 2 that stuck it out, but the 10 that didn't. And he was convincing them and screaming and teaching and guiding and persuading the Jewish people to keep the bris milah, to keep a bris, that they should continue to make a bris, circumcision at 8 days. And the Torah tells us that God, as a reward for that, Elijah is present by every bris. You ever heard of the Kisi Shel Eliyahu? There's the chair for Elijah the prophet. That's because Elijah the prophet is coming. And in fact, because Elijah the prophet comes to every bris, we're not allowed to invite anybody to a bris. You're not allowed to give an invitation. So, I mean, whatever, you give an invitation, nothing's going to happen to you. But we try not to invite people, because if a person can't come, it's like saying it's giving, it's making fun of, it's not making fun of, it's disrespectful to Elijah the prophet. Elijah the prophet's going to come and you're going to say, no, I got to go to work. I got other things to do. So we don't say, we actually just announce that the bris will take place at such and such a time, and hopefully you'll come. So we see the connection with Pinchas and Elijah, that they both were into protecting that which is holy in the body. And what ends up happening. So now we know why Pinchas is called Elazar by the name of Aaron as well. Let's keep going on. Moving on. Okay, yeah, basically towards the end. So now there's a plague. Whenever there's a plague, when the Jews start acting up, when we start fighting amongst each other, there's a plague. And every time at the end of a plague, God makes another census. Now, most tribes, interestingly enough, you'll see, have about 50 to 70,000 members of their tribe. There's one tribe, Dan, which is a very interesting, something very interesting. He had a son, Dan, who was one of the 12 sons of Yaakov, who was hearing impaired. He had a son, he had one child, that was it. And his name was Chushim. And he was hearing impaired. And what ended up happening from him, what a very interesting story. Dan was actually the one he killed Esav. He chopped off his head. It's a very interesting story. Esav's head is buried in Maras Machpelah, in the cave of Machpelah, together with Yaakov and Abraham and Yitzchak and Sarah and Leah and Rivka, not Rachel, right? Rachel's buried somewhere else. His head, Chushim ended up killing him. Anyway, but Chushim, he had he was hearing impaired, and it affected him in a big way. Now, you would think someone with special needs, unfortunately, that they might not have such a large family, they might not be able to accomplish a lot. But the tribe of Dan had the second most members by the time they entered the land of Israel. And what the significance of that is that God is telling you that the destiny of a person can change overnight. It doesn't matter what sort of hindrances you might have or special needs that you might have. God is in control. And you might think this guy wouldn't have such a big family, but he ends up having the second most right after Reuven. Now, the Torah moves on and mentions certain families who left Egypt. So the tribes mention, very interesting. The tribes mention, there are certain families that are mentioned when the Jews leave Egypt. There are a lot of families that are mentioned. There are 7 families which are not mentioned right before the entering of the land of Israel. What happened? So you have the tribe of Benjamin. It says there's 10 families over here, and then it mentions Gad and Shimon and Levi. It's missing 5 families between Gad, Shimon, and Levi. 7 families altogether. So what happened? So Rashi explains over here that after the clouds, the Anani Kavod left, Aaron passes away, so to speak. There were 7 families between Gad and Shimon who were heading back to Egypt. And the tribe of Levi actually went to convince them to come back. So then what happens? A fight breaks out. Obviously, Shimon is they got problems in this week's Parsha. Yeah, so a fight breaks out, and 5 families from the tribe of Levi die, and the other families of Gad and of Shimon die too, which is kind of a bizarre story, but God is going to tell us something very interesting, that not only the good guys don't always win. That's a very common theme throughout the Torah. Just because you're a good guy doesn't mean you're actually going to win a fight. In fact, which we're going to find out soon in a few more Parshias. Actually, now in this week's Parsha, the division of the land is going to take place. And not everybody got an equal portion. To show you that everything in this life, there's no such thing as communism. Everyone's not going to get equal amount. That's not equality. Everyone having the same amount is not proper. That doesn't mean that's the most proper way. But we'll get into that. So moving on about the division of the land. So there's 5 daughters of Zlefchad. Who was Zlefchad? Zlefchad was the man who was a Mechal Shabbos. He was the one that God gave after the sin of the golden calf. The Jewish people weren't really sure whether God still had the covenant with us, whether he wanted us. And Zlefchad, according to one opinion, or a opinion, an accepted opinion, he said, no, God still does want us, and I'm going to prove it to you. I'm going to be Mechal Shabbos. I'm going to desecrate Shabbos, and Shabbos is something that's only given to the Jewish people. And if a person desecrates Shabbos on purpose, in front of everybody, he's been warned, and it's the whole thing, but nevertheless, if he does it in front of everybody, he's chayiv kares, he gets killed. So Zlefchad gave up his life. Zlefchad went and was mechalo, he desecrated Shabbos in front of everybody, and he was killed. And what that did was show that God still kept the covenant with the Jewish people. Now, did Zlefchad have to do it this way? I have to say it was a bit frowned upon, the way Zlefchad did, but nevertheless, this is what happened. You'd think, by the way, that the Jewish people have all these open miracles, and yeah, this is like the generation that's about to enter the land of Israel, the generation that left Egypt. You see how many problems they have. Yeah, there's a lot of internal fights, internal struggles, external fights. Again, it shows on a spiritually speaking, because the physical world is a real world. Yeah, we're neshamas, we're souls, and we're spiritual, and we're connected to God, but we also have a physicality, a part of us that does not see God. And there's this constant fight in between, that even though once a miracle can take place, or a miracle can happen a couple times a day, but nevertheless, because the person didn't change, it's sort of it's put upon you. Yeah, if someone forces you to do something, it doesn't change you. You still remain who you are. So even though all these miracles were coming, they were forced upon the Jewish people, so to speak, but they didn't change from the inside. So all these, which still happens till today. Yeah, a person has some miracle that happened to them. Now you should ride the momentum, but you should take it and internalize it and start. That's when the work really begins, after the miracle takes place. So Zlefchad and all these people getting into fights, we've had that for since the beginning, is my point. So Zlefchad, the daughters come and they say, our father died and we have no brothers. So which means we're not going to have an inheritance in the land of Israel, because God said you give it to the father or you give it to the sons. Zlefchad, the 5 daughters of Zlefchad said, well, we don't have any. What do? We want a portion of the land of Israel. They were very intelligent girls, ladies, and they were very Zionistic. they were real Zionists. They really wanted a portion of the land of Israel. And Moshe said, I don't know. Let me ask God. So God ultimately said, yes, you should give them a portion of the land of Israel. And that's what ends up happening. And I just want to explain that something in like modern times, this Jewish women didn't always, the concept of girls going to school really didn't happen until about the 20th century, that Jewish girls would go to a Jewish school. What happened? really the Jewish girls, they would stay home and they would learn, they would help, they would be mother's helpers. They would help their mother and around the house. And the boys, if they could afford it, if the parents could afford it, they would send the boys to school. And maybe once in a while, a parent could afford a child, a daughter to go to school. They'd be so wealthy, they could afford a child to go to school, a girl to go to school, but they would send her to a secular school because there were no Jewish schools. But then in Poland and Russia, there was forced schooling, like we have in America. There's you have to go to school, and they would be sent to secular school, and the community leaders felt they're not getting the same environment that they had, in the previous generations. So they were forced to open up Jewish schools. And nowadays, that's something that is what's called a davar pashut. Of course, we would do that, but at the time, that was quite novel. Now it speaks about people like Rashi, who did teach his daughters, the Or HaChaim HaKodesh, who has a pirush, has an explanation on the Torah. And those explanations on the Torah, by the way, were those things that he would tell his daughters at the Shabbos table. He would tell over his daughters an idea at the Shabbos table. They would discuss, and they were like little kids, I think. They would discuss deep ideas. And Sunday and Monday, the Or HaChaim would write down his thoughts and his exchanges between his kids. And it was organized in a way that, it wasn't just like a conversation, but it was organized. And this book is, the Or HaChaim is, they call him HaKodesh, the Holy Or HaChaim. So we always had Jewish girls learning, but never like in an organized manner. And so this concept, I just want to say, is only a 20th century concept that Jewish girls actually go to school, which all would agree is obviously a good thing. Now, the concept though of inheritance, Jewish daughters are still not, according to Torah, they don't get an inheritance. But since the times of Zlefchad, the Jewish people always found a way to make sure that the daughters, assuming that the parents were good and they had what to leave, first of all, they have what to leave over. But it was a healthy family, they would give an inheritance to the daughters. But what would they do? It wouldn't be an inheritance. In other words, they wouldn't have to go through probate and through a will. It was left as a gift. Not an inheritance and a gift are two different things. And so what they would write out in a will, they would write out in a contract, the parents would write in a contract saying, but retroactively, I'm giving this as a gift to all my children. So everything would be split. Yeah, they had 4 children with $4 million. The parents had $4 million. I'm leaving a gift of $1 million to each child. So there would be no inheritance, so to speak, but it would be given over as a gift. That really inheritance, I just want to emphasize, inheritance is not to be given to a young lady. But nevertheless, we do it anyway. We find a way. The rabbis have always found a way to make sure that it would happen, assuming that it was a healthy family and we're in a good community. Just moving on. What else over here? So God allows Moshe. Okay, so God is bringing Moshe now to the land of Israel, right? The Jewish people are about to get into the land of Israel. Moshe is not going, but God allows him to look at the land of Israel. And Moshe asks Hashem something very interesting. He said, who's going to be my successor? And Rashi says here in verse 10 that I want my children to inherit my high position. It's interesting that we don't talk really about Moshe's children. And the reality is, Moshe was really involved in community matters, and he didn't spend so much time. Am I still recording? Yeah, sorry, it said over here that I'm signed out. Everyone still hear me? Said I was just signed out, so.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Okay. So what happened? Moshe's children are not mentioned here. They're not really mentioned. And the tradition tells us because he was really involved with the Jewish people. He didn't really spend so much time with his own kids. And we know that he divorced his wife. But Moshe wanted his child to take over as the Nasi, as the leader of the Jewish people, as the Torah leader of the Jewish people. And you know what God said? No. First of all, it's kind of interesting of Moshe to ask such a thing. No, a little bit of nepotism, but it says that there was a little bit of jealousy. he had a little bit of jealousy that Aaron's children took over his position. All right, Elazar became the high priest. But Moshe, it wasn't so much about nepotism. Moshe, God was trying to teach Moshe something. When God said no, Moshe said, that's great. Okay, no problem. Because what happened? God said, when it comes to Torah, being a Torah leader, it's not by inheritance. There's no right that you inherit to become the next Torah leader. Anybody can become the Torah leader, right? Moshe was from the tribe of Levi, who was most of the leaders of the Jewish people came from the tribe of Yehuda. It didn't even stick within their own tribe. And the tribe of Levi were the scholars of the time. They were the scholars in Egypt. They never were subjugated. They were always the ones that led, were on the forefront. They were God's front, the frontline soldiers. But nevertheless, when it comes to Torah, it's about whoever, it's up for grabs. Whoever wants to grab it can take it. And Elazar ben Azariah, as we read in the Haggadah, Elazar ben Azariah, he says, I'm like a man of 70 years old. What's the story of Elazar ben Azariah? He was 17 years old. And they appointed him, after Rabbi Gamliel, I believe, they appointed him as the leader of the Jewish people, as the Nasi, as the Torah giant. He was 17. As we say in Yiddish, pasnish. Doesn't seem very fitting that he should be. No, but everyone recognized that he was the Torah leader. I don't care what you look like or what your pedigree is. Look at Rabbi Akiva's pedigree. Look at Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish was a Torah leader, and he was a bandit for 25 years or 20, 30 years until he mistook. He went after one of the sages, who would become his future brother-in-law. He thought one of the sages was a beautiful woman. He was chasing after her. Well, it's a whole interesting story that we'll maybe one day explore. But nevertheless, the Torah can be given to whoever wants to acquire it. So that's obviously a good lesson for us. God said no. So Moshe makes a suggestion to God and says, okay, fine. If you're not going to give my children the inheritance, can I make a suggestion? And God says, yeah, I'll listen to your suggestion. He says, I think the quality, the character trait that is needed most for the Jewish people, in other words, to be a leader, the character trait that's needed most to lead the Jewish people is tolerance. Ruchais. Okay, a ruchais, Rashi explains, it means tolerance. The person needs to be tolerant of every person. Also, he says that someone can lead from the front, like King David. Yeah, unlike most leaders, they lead from the back. Someone who can lead from the front. But nevertheless, tolerance is the one that's most needed as a leader. You need to put up with all different kinds of people. And not just put up, but not be persuaded or not feel any ill will. Not be, what's the word I'm looking for? You shouldn't be affected by people's personalities. Everyone has a different personality, and your job is to try to connect to them. But be tolerant nevertheless, which we find is not very common by leaders. Yeah, leaders, they just tell you, follow what I say, and that's the end of it. No, not a Torah leader is not like that. A Torah leader should be able to connect and tolerate everybody. So then God says, okay, I'm pointing Yeshua. Moshe likes the idea. He likes Yeshua. He thinks that's the right choice. Yeshua had that quality. And God says, give him smicha. Smicha means place your hand on his head. Place your hands on his head. And it says that the ruach of Moshe went over to Yehoshua. What is that ruach? The ruach HaKodesh, but like a candle. Don't think that the ruach left Moshe and completely left Moshe and then went to Yeshua. No, but just like a candle. A candle, yeah, you can light one candle from another lit candle. A lit candle can light another candle without losing its fire. That's the amazing thing about fire. A fire can light up another candle and not lose its existence. That's the same thing. A neshama is the same thing. A neshama can give to another person without losing its own metzias, without losing its own form, its own identity, its own existence. So that's what happened. Moshe gave his ruach, his spirit, so to speak, over to Yeshua, and he became endowed with the spirit of Moshe. Smicha is the term that we also use to become a rabbi. You get what's called smicha. But nowadays we don't stick our hands. Yeah, I don't know if you can probably see over here. I got my little certificate over there. It's like the only thing on the wall. I don't know why, but my wife put it up there. Don't think I did that. I'm not that vain. It's just that you just get a certificate and they shake your hand when you're done after a couple of years. But back in the day, it used to be that they would put their hands on top of you and say, you now have smicha. Smicha literally means to lean on. We can lean on you. That's how Moshe gave smicha to Yeshua and Yeshua to the Zakanim, the Anshik, the Zakanim, the elders, that he gave them smicha, put their hands on their heads and so on and so forth. But we don't really do that anymore. Moving on. Oh, this is interesting. What is smicha? By the way, it says that Rashi explains that that Yeshua got smicha, and it calls it ayin tov, a good eye. What does a good eye mean? A good eye means not to be jealous. It's not jealous of anybody. Yeah, it says in Mishnah Pirkei Avos, it says about Bilam that he had an ayin ra. What's an ayin ra? A bad eye. Even though he literally had a bad eye, it means that he was jealous. Jealousy is the beginning of the end. But a good leader is not jealous of anybody. What does he have to be jealous of anyway? I mean, he's sitting at the top. But that doesn't say that. I just made that up. Then the Torah moves on to, let's move on over here. The Torah talks about the daily sacrifices, which we read every day, the karbanis. Interestingly enough, it talks about the holiday sacrifices. For the different chagim, for Sukkot, Pesach, Sukkot, and Shavuos. And we read this Parsha every holiday for the Maftir. So obviously this week has a special connection to the Maftir. Has a special connection to all the holidays. There's a special way to connect and to draw from that. And I just want to talk about the Maftir really quickly. We have 7 aliyahs. We have 8 aliyahs to the Torah. When a person gets called up to the Torah on Shabbos, there's 8 spots, so to speak. The first 7 are regular, and the 8th one has a special name called the Maftir. And the one who has the Maftir is honored with reading the Haftorah. The first one goes to Kohen, as we always give preference to the Kohen, no matter what. When it comes to benching, after eating a meal, holding the door should be given to a Kohen. You should stand up when the Kohen comes in. Yeah, there's a lot of different rules. Then the second one is given to a Levi. And then the third aliyah is considered a very special aliyah. That's the first chance a Yisrael, an Israel, has to get up to the Torah. So that's if you're a gabbai, I'm the gabbai of my shul. I'm the one that runs the minyan. I make sure that the show goes on, so to speak. Things are moving. So if you want to give a special aliyah, you give one to the third. Because that's the first chance. Number 6 is considered very special. Why? Because it's connected to the sphera of Yesod, and Yesod is connected with righteousness. So you're so to speak declaring that someone is righteous. But the most chashiv, the one that is considered the biggest honor, is the maftir. And maftir is connected to the haftarah. And what's so special about that? First of all, the maftir we can give it to anybody. It can be given to a Kohen, a Levi, or a Yisrael. And what was the whole point of the haftarahs? Let's talk about why did the haftarahs happen. In the times of the Romans, they forbade the reading of the Torah. So the sages of the time thought of an idea. They said, let us read on Shabbos something from the prophets, whatever that's connected, that would have been connected to that week's Parsha. In other words, whatever the main theme of that week's Parsha is, let us go ahead and learn it from the Haftorah. Let's go find it in the prophets. If you want to know what the main theme of the Parsha of the week is, look in the Haftorah, study the Haftorah. And the Haftorah, but what happened? Then the decree was eventually lifted after a period of time, but the Jewish people kept it. The Haftarah shows on this idea of concealment, gullus, but bringing out the light within gullus, which is the whole point of creation, is to fight within the darkness, reveal light from the darkness, reveal the light that comes from darkness, shine light onto the darkness. And it's the most connected to the tachlis of creation. That's the whole point of creation. So therefore the maftir is connected, has a special connection to, since maftir is connected to the Haftorah, that has this, and the person who has the maftir reads the Haftorah, it's, so to speak, this is the whole reason for creation. you're now fulfilling the whole reason for creation. Forget all of the honors and all the glory, and you have to go first, and who has to go down. Here comes a person who's doing the whole point of why we're here. So that is considered the greatest honor. If a person, just a practical halacha, if a person doesn't know how to read the Haftorah, but he gets maftir, he actually has to read the blessings for the Haftorah. Nevertheless, it happens very often. Does anybody have any questions? That's pretty much the entire parsha over here. Anybody have any questions?
Rabbi, quick question. I know this was in the Parsha earlier about when Moshe Rabbeinu does the census. It mentions about interesting enough about Asher's daughter Sarah, who is still alive, and we still believe to this day that Sarah is still alive. Correct? And if that's the case, where do we think Sarah is?
That's a good question. I don't know too much about that, to be honest. I have to look that up. I'm somewhat familiar, but I don't know. I'm not exactly sure. I know about Elijah. I know about Elijah. He didn't die the same way that everybody else died. It says his soul never left his body, and he actually went up to Shemayim. He went up to heaven, soul in body. Right? Elisha is telling you over the story. His servant Elisha, and he saw him go up. And so Elijah comes down physically, I guess. Well, there's many stories of how to see Elijah the prophet, who saw Elijah the prophet and why. But about Zerach, I don't know. I have to look that up. Good question. Sorry, that was a long response to your. Does anybody have any more questions? No? About this week's Parsha? All right, it's not a very long Parsha. And I just want to mention a little bit something else. I want to mention about the 3 weeks. Yesterday was a fast day. Shiva, also B'Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz. A few things, 5 calamities happened, one of which was the breaking of the tablets. Moshe came down from the mountain and broke the tablets. But another one that I want to mention were the walls. The one that was most significant were the walls of Jerusalem. The walls of Jerusalem were breached. What do the walls represent? Because the walls of Jerusalem were breached. They started to pillage and sack the city, and eventually 3 weeks later, the temple was destroyed. The temple began to be destroyed on the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, but it really burned for the entire 10th of Av. As we know, on the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av is the saddest day in the Jewish calendar, when both temples were destroyed, and a lot of other calamities happened on that day. But it took 3 weeks. So these 3 weeks are now 3 weeks of mourning, so to speak. So we don't listen to music. We try not to listen to live music if you can. Don't get a haircut. I'm gonna look like Krusty the Clown by the time I'm done over here. We try not to listen to live music. And then the last week on the 9th of Av, which we'll speak about when we get there, the last 9 days. So Rosh Chodesh Av through until the 9th, we don't listen to music. We don't eat meat. Try not to eat meat, so you eat a lot of pasta, a lot of pizza, a lot of fish. We don't go swimming. It's a time that we have to be extra careful. You can listen to recorded music. Yeah, you can listen to recorded music now. On the last 9 days, we should be very careful about these things. Try not to travel in those last 9 days. And I just want to represent what is the concept. Today is the 18th. So what are these walls of Jerusalem? What do they represent? Yesterday, the walls of Jerusalem were breached. The walls of Jerusalem are not Jerusalem. The walls represent customs of the Jewish people. What happened was the people started throwing off certain customs. Yeah, why do I need to? It's a custom of the Jewish people to wear a yarmulke. Yeah, it's not a law. It is a law. It can't become a law. But it was a custom for a long time. What's another custom? Whatever. There are certain customs that you might have in your own family. When a person starts saying, I don't need to keep these customs, it's not law. I don't need to keep these customs, that's the beginning of the end. It says those are the customs are what keeps the sacred and holy protected. It's good to have customs. It's not good to have a lot of customs, but it's good to have customs. And you should keep to those customs, and you should find out what your family customs are. You should find out if you're an Ashkenazi, you should follow the Ashkenazi customs. Sephardim, you should find the Sephardi customs. Very much encourage the keeping of customs. In fact, Ashkenazi Jews do not have a custom of not eating rice on Passover. We don't eat rice on Passover. In 1981, Iran, the country of Iran was, the Shah was taken over, the king was taken over, and Muslim extremists came in, right? So the Rebbe organized that refugees, Iranian kids, should be taken out of Iran right away. It was many hundreds of families in America. A lot of them are in Chabad, and like Chabad leaders, they escaped because Chabad arranged like an escape for a lot of people. They weren't the only organization doing this, but they were recognized by Jimmy Carter. What was a big deal? They I don't know about not Jimmy Carter. They were recognized by whatever the president at the time. When the Jewish children, these are Sephardim, when the Jewish children came to 770, the Rebbe's shul, the Rebbe's synagogue, the Rebbe said, it was during Pesach, the Rebbe said, do they have rice? Now it's an Ashkenazi shul. I mean, Hasidic Jews are pretty Ashkenazi. There's no rice going on. And the Rebbe said, you should have rice. There should be rice, and cook it in our kitchen. And that's what they did. They brought rice in, they cooked it in the kitchen because it's a custom, right? It's not a law. Ashkenazim have a custom not to eat it, and we are very strict about not eating it. But Sephardim do have a custom to eat it. And so therefore they should hold on to their customs. The Rebbe even made it so that they should have rice in his shul that probably had never had rice. And the people cooking the rice definitely had rice in their house, probably ever. But nevertheless, the power of keeping a custom, and that's what's considered the walls of Jerusalem, because the people started throwing off their customs. The walls were breached, so to speak. But if we hold on to our customs, that'll protect us, that'll protect the Jerusalem, the Yerushalayim, the perfect fear, the fear of God, which is our neshama. That's what's the part of us that's perfectly has fear and awe of God is our neshama. That protects the neshama. That's what we're trying to do. And if you build strong enough walls, you can't be breached. The no enemies from what external and internal can affect you, Mashiach should come then, right now. Anybody have any questions? All right, so I'll see you tonight for whatever, I forgot the class, but I'll be here. And text me if you have any questions. By the way, so some of you I still haven't learned with one-on-one. Please text me about setting up a time. I would like to learn with you one-on-one for at least 20 minutes a week on any subject that you'd like. And that's it. Okay, be well, everybody. Sei gesund. The class will be on YouTube very soon.